There it is. It's called The Music by my buddy Marty Zalistra. Absolutely getting you hyped for the new season, season 8 of Offside Hockey Talk. And I got my buddy who rides shotgun so often on this show, David Morassutti of Locked On Leafs. David, how's it going today, buddy?
Awesome. I love the intro, by the way.
Yeah, it's kicking the season off the right way, man. It gives the vibes as soon as you come in the door. It's ready to go season, buddy.
No, you know what? Like those sort of things, that's what gets you going. Let you know that hockey is just right around the corner.
Oh, it's what? Camp probably, I'd say about 15, 16 days away, in and around there.
Yeah,
Guys will start showing up more and more.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You're already going to be seeing the guys doing the skates and all the media guys checking all the skates so they can get some content.
Oh, it's happening. It's happening. Well, speaking of content, the big piece of content that happened this summer for the Maple Leafs was John Tavares being stripped of the C. And I say it like that because to me, I said it to you, and I've said it many times again, it's a passing of the torch to me. It does not feel like your prototypical, the team's going the wrong way, things are all bad, it's doom and gloom, strip the C, change the narrative, flip the mood in the room. That's not what this is. This was more saying Craig Berube is coming in. This is a new era. Let's usher it in underneath the Auston Matthews era, which probably should have happened earlier if someone didn't really show his ass. You know, that probably would have happened sooner, in my opinion. I think it would have. But this guy now has shown the maturity, shown the growth, and become an absolute bona fide NHL megastar. And why not have the C on his chest? Apparently, he already talks the talk in the room. Brad Terliving said so. So to me, it doesn't feel like he was stripped of the C in John Tavares. It feels like he passed the torch to Auston Matthews and is ready to be there in a supporting role for his teammate.
How many NHL teams go through what the Leafs did to do this change of the captaincy, right? I looked back. We talked about this on the podcast. San Jose,
by the way.
Yeah. San Jose a couple of times when they moved the C around. It was never done with the ceremony. The Jets with Blake Wheeler just said, we're taking the C away from you and we're not giving it to anyone, right? Like, the Leafs actually put thought into this and how they did it. To me, yeah, it's viewed as stripped of the C because he doesn't have it anymore. But it was a necessary changing of the guard because, I mean, we've already known this. This is Auston Matthews' team.
Yep.
But this is now, he is now the guy. He is leading us more so, I think, than maybe we have come to expect, right? Because, like, we don't hear about those ways that Matthews is viewed as a leader because it just doesn't get brought up, right? This to me cements where this team is supposed to fall behind, right? It is Auston Matthews, and it always has been, but I think this is just, it's more defined now, I think, in more ways. And it means something, right? The captaincy of these original six teams means something, right? You look at the guys who he's following, right? And so I think that's why this had to be done as delicately as it was done. Unlike teams in the past that have just kind of just thrown it around, captaincy of the Leafs means something.
No, it definitely does. And one thing for me that was a nice touch by John Tavares and his family, all the young ones wearing the Auston Matthews jersey with the newly minted C on it. Absolutely awesome. I think that's like a little cherry on top.
Yeah.
Where it's showing that John is in with this move. He's not mad about it, sad about it. You know, he's motivated to make this team go whatever direction it needs to go. And I do think there is an extension coming for John Tavares as well, where he stays around the Leafs at a lower cap hit. And we'll see what happens there. But again, I don't think it was a strip to the sea. I like the way they did the ceremony. I like the way they brought everybody in, prepared statements, everything, right? So it was done properly. It wasn't like we saw back in the day in the front page of the Toronto Sun, the big E stripped of the C. You know, that was the headline on the Toronto Sun when Eric Lindros lost the captaincy. So this was done right, in my opinion.
Yeah, it was done right. And I do think that when you look at where the direction of this team's going, right, it's funny because when we talk about like the identity of this team and like who falls behind who, right, like Brad Chilvin came in here, tried to dispel the whole notion of the core four. In a way, like, maybe it gets more defined when you get Auston Matthews as the captain, right? It's almost like it's his team. He's eating the ship. Everything kind of falls onto him in a way. But at the same time, it's almost like, for me, the captaincy, it's nice, but it's not just one guy. Everyone has to kind of pull it in together.
Yeah.
And how I see all this. But I just think it just clearly defines right now where the Leafs want to push, right? They're going with the younger guy. They're going with the guy who's technically signed for longer term as well, right? I said like they could have done it next year and it would have also made sense, but I feel like now, because they really want to, I hate to say it, but maybe they just want to show that things were going to change.
Yeah.
Maybe not in the way that we thought it was going to happen, but this is how they view things, as like a big change.
Well, I mean, in a sense, it is a big change. Obviously, new voice, new leadership. We don't know what will be said in the room or how different it'll actually be, day-to-day interactions. But at the same time, it does give Austin Matthews more of a step, more of a push, more of a leadership role on the ice when talking to the refs and all that stuff, right? So now all that direction is pointed towards him. He's now going to be more of a focal point with the media, and be out there in the forefront. So that is a different change, and we'll see how he handles it. I think he's going to handle it in stride and be fine, in my opinion.
I mean, here's the thing. He knows what the market's like. He knows what this whole thing entails. Does he know exactly what it means to be the captain? No. But I don't think that really changes much of how Austin Matthews is, right? Like, Brad Treliving did this because he's seen how Austin Matthews is and knows he can handle it. I don't think it changes too much in how he is. Maybe he feels like he has to take things on differently as the captain, but I don't view anything really changing too much from Austin Matthews' perspective. He just has to go out and do what he does. Maybe in the locker room he has to now take on a little bit more, maybe than he has. But again, we've already been led to believe that that's already happened.
That's true. Well, I want to ask you, what is your but why move for the Maple Leafs this offseason? Something that's kind of like led you to be a head scratcher of why the team would do this.
I think really, when you see how things have kind of been stagnant with this team, maybe I know we don't know. I know that it was brought up to John Tavares. Maybe he kind of felt like he wanted. He kind of viewed things as like, this is Austin Matthews. Like we've seen it so many times that like, this is Austin Matthews' team. So maybe it's just his realization that like Tavares is in a different part of his career.
Yeah.
Right? He is now going to be kind of, I wouldn't say the support, like totally support piece, but he is leaning towards that way, right? So I think maybe for Tavares, this allows him to just focus on being a good player for this team, right? I think maybe it just takes a little bit of the pressure off him, because hate to say it, he's going to have a lot to deal with this year with the pending contract and things like that.
Yes, he will.
Give Austin Matthews that responsibility, right? And maybe the Leafs just felt like they wanted to pass that off and maybe let John Tavares to focus on other things rather than being the captain.
That's true. That's true. For me, I'd say the but why movement this offseason was Matt Murray coming back to the Toronto Maple Leafs. I know it's a low risk, low reward kind of thing, but why? You have Dennis Hildeby. You have other guys that you want to kind of usher in. You're talking about veteran support like Martin Jones was, but you don't know what the health of Matt Murray is. I don't think you really owed Matt Murray kind of anything here. You could definitely have kept him around as a guy that works out with the practice squad or is on the ice with the Black Aces here and there. The Leafs have done this a few times with different goaltenders who are rehabbing things and, allowed it to be what it needed to be. But for me, the Matt Murray thing was like, okay, cool, I guess. But it seems like you'd be taking playing times away from a younger guy.
I chuckled at it, really. Well, I think the reason why they did this, if you're going to keep a guy as like in that Martin Jones role where he might be put on waivers, he might just be sticking around, it is a Matt Murray. That way there, you're not worrying about one of your younger guys have to be yo-yoing between true. Right? You want to keep the young guys focused on playing with the Marlies. Maybe once in a while if Matt Murray is waived and he's put in the Marlies, maybe also teams are just less likely to play Matt Murray on waivers.
Yeah, that's an angle I didn't look at it, to be honest.
But I mean, the Leafs right now, with the way the cap is structured, they don't have to worry about waiving Matt Murray unless they need the roster space, right? If they need the extra player, but they can right now keep Matt Murray on the roster and just have him practice, right? And that might feel like good enough for him because he's a player that's been around for a while, and so I don't think he needs to worry about. He's just trying to get himself to show teams maybe I can be an option down the road, and maybe the Leafs are just offering him a chance to slowly get there because I don't even know if he's fully healthy.
That's
right?
true.
We don't
He was
know.
ready to play in the playoffs, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, how good he would have been, I don't know. I mean, the Marlies didn't exactly, dominate when he came back. Which, I mean, if you're expecting a goalie to dominate after hip surgery, I think that's asking for a lot. So I think just, what, for Matt Murray, he realizes this year, slowly work your way, right? And as we've seen, you need 3 goalies.
Yep.
You need 3. There's no like right now in today's NHL, if you don't have 3 capable NHL goalies, you're putting yourself in a tough spot. The Leafs, like they were almost needing 4 goalies last year.
Yeah, it was tough sledding. Hildeby sat on the bench and watched. Was very
and
close to playing.
and they don't want that. They don't want Hildeby to be on the bench. They want him playing. They don't want any of their younger goaltenders being on the bench. So that's why I think they did the Matt Murray thing. They're less. I think it just all kind of works out that, hey, it gets claimed. Good for Matt Murray, right? You find another goaltender and claim another goaltender if that happens. But I just think with the way that the goaltending situations worked, and also you've got a young guy in Joel Woll, maybe a Matt Murray kind of helps bring him along too. You got that veteran presence with him as well.
Will also went through the kind of thing that he's going through right now, Joe Woll. He came in as a young goaltender looking to save a team's bacon. And right now he's going to be looked at as the number 1 goaltender for the Maple Leafs with Anthony Stolarz backing him up, which we'll talk about here in a moment. But I'll ask you this question. Obviously, the offseason, we get to see a lot of this. Who do you think is a early riser for the Maple Leafs? We haven't gone through training camp, but just on paper, who do you think has a chance to be a riser for the Maple Leafs this year?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I mean, for me, when I look at this depth chart and everything kind of the Leafs have done, right? Up front, there's not really – they didn't do much, right? They didn't go out and bring in a big forward. So I kind of look at who's the guy that can elevate. To me, it's got to be Matthew Nyes.
He definitely can. Yes.
Like, he's going to be probably in now, depending on what Craig Berube thinks and how they plan things out, he might be a top 6. He might be top line, right? With the way that the roster's looking right now. I figure like you maybe I don't know what the 3C situation is. Max Domi probably either gets looked there or maybe gets on the second line. Or do they do the Domi, Matthews, Marner? I don't think so. I think they want that bigger body, someone to go in and do a bit of the grunt work. That's Matthew Nyes to me, right?
Oh, yeah.
Another guy I was thinking about too, and I've been big on him ever since the Leafs brought him in, was Bobby McMann.
That's who I was going to say is Bobby McMann. I think he's going to pop off this year.
Like, let's make sure he's healthy. I think that's the important one for him. He's got to be healthy. But I also think his game, Craig Berube, it just translates so well with Craig Berube.
It does. He's a guy that, again, a worker, a guy who will grind, who can throw the body around a little bit, which got him into the trouble of injuries. But he doesn't mind blocking shots either. Mm-hmm. He's a guy who pretty much will do it all and can play in your top 6. He's shown that. And he's got a hell of a shot, too. So,
right. You need that. Even if he's a third-line winger, if he's able to contribute similar to what he did last year where they need that. That's something they've missed. They don't have that depth scoring. He was missed in the playoffs for sure.
Oh, my God. If he was in against Boston, I think it would have been a different story. If he was the physical kind of player that he was down the stretch, adding that shot, potting those goals, and, of course, blocking the shots, doing everything. He was doing it all. And if we had that in our lineup on the third line, I think it would add a little bit more juice and jam.
You definitely they don't have enough of that. And and people say, oh, they got to go out and get it. They got to trade for it. Some of that's got to be internal. And that's why I root for a guy like Bobby McMann. That's internal. That's your own internal development finally breaking through, right? You're finding guys in the minors that could step up and be something for your team. They just haven't
Easton
had
Gowan
anyone.
might be a guy too.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to throw too much at the kid, obviously. But at the same time, if he's pushing, if he is giving you everything to say he's got to play, we got to play him, do it. Right? Like, I know some people are like, oh, but you got to think of the ELC. Don't think about that. You're a team that
Good enough to play and make your team better, he plays. Period.
same with Fraser Minton.
Yeah.
You've got to start ushering in your younger talent, right? That make your team more dynamic, right? Like you see, like the David Camps. You know what a David Camp is, right? You know what a Pontus Holmberg is.
Yeah.
You know what these guys are. These younger guys have more of a ceiling. They elevate what you're trying to do. So, yeah, if you're looking at risers, I look to the guys who are you're bang on your own internal guys. Nyes, McMahon, technically not drafted, and he's a little bit older, but he's a late bloomer.
Yep.
Like those guys that stepped up in big spots and have shown that they've got more to their game than just what those like I would call like the fringe players that they've had in the past.
Well, listen, let's talk tumblers then. And for me, Tumbler, you mentioned him twice already on the tip of your tongue. David Camp, to me, is a tumbler. He's a guy that I really won't care if he's not in the Maple Leafs lineup come opening night. He was a guy I was very high on when they first signed him on the low contract. But the newer contract he's had last year, to me, he wasn't the player I expected. His D-zone starts where he was supposed to be the guy that you leaned on for those key face-offs. He was horrible in his own zone, 33.3% on the dot, and I'll harp on that until he improves it. But if that's your guy you're using in defensive situations on the penalty kill and regular 5-on-5, that is not good enough. That guy needs to be better, and I think you can find better for cheaper.
I think what I'm hoping with this new coaching staff, or at least with Craig Berube and some of the guys he's bringing in, that guys like David Camp, we're going to have to really earn their spot, right? Like, yeah, it's not just that he hasn't played well. He didn't play well after getting a pretty sizable contract for the player he is, right? Like, if you're Brad Treliving, that one probably stings, right? Considering how much you paid for him and things like that. There's no room for a guy like David Camp to have a drop off. And you know what? This is why like a Fraser Minton they got to push a guy like that, because hopefully a Fraser Minton will push a David Camp to be at his best, right? And maybe when you have like a roster like the Leafs where things are a little more set in stone, players get a little complacent, right? David Camp probably felt, who else are they going to get to play over me, right?
Yeah.
When you like, it's not like, you know, at times, like, look at the guys they put on waivers. It's not centers. They don't have centers to just say, we can throw a David Camp out there and hopefully somebody will claim him.
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that. And I think that's why that was my only pet peeve about the offseasons. They didn't get anyone to try to push a David Camp, right, as a 3C, 4C potential here. So... yeah, David Camp he was like my biggest disappointment from last year, I would say.
Yeah, well, you expect so much out of him. You want him to be that de facto, 4C defensive guy, take those draws, pot in a little offense, get excited when he does. But it wasn't the same last year for me. So we'll see what happens this season. But one guy that is sticking around for a while, he signed the deal. He did the Wolf on Wall Street with his face on the body. I'm not going anywhere. Is Mr. Max Domi, and he really is showing that he's excited to be a Leaf, excited to be here. The chemistry with Matthews is awesome. You can flip to that option if you need to. He also can move up and down your lineup. He's got the versatility. I think once he got comfortable in Toronto last year, kind of the Bertuzzi thing too, right? It was more almost halfway through the season where he finally figured it out and started rolling, started getting points, started showing he can be versatility with all these different players. That's the Max Domi we were all hoping for. And, of course, the spiciness, he brings that too, defending his teammates, drags other guys into it. I love that about him. But Max Domi, man, I'm fired up to have him for 4 more years.
I think more people were happy. It's funny how many people were like, we'll take Max Domi over Mitch Marner. I got a lot of that this offseason. I just think it just speaks to his character, right? I mean, The name doesn't hurt either.
No.
But like I think Max Domi realizes, maybe he grew up with this team. He grew up like this is his home. This is home for him, right? And you see the way he's kind of embraced it. He is a character guy. Like when we talk about like the guys they brought in last year, why we're so happy and so excited for the Domis and the Bertuzzis is those guys are polar opposite of some of the players they already have.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's why more people gravitated towards it. And guys like Domi are always going to win the fans over because they got that character in them. And so, I mean, what I didn't like about what happened with Max Domi last year, I knew there was more for him. I knew he could have been better than he was last year. But the problem was, I don't think Sheldon Keefe really knew how to properly use him until it was kind of clicked together. This guy's actually a pretty good offensive player when you play him in the right position and with the right players. Yeah, it took him playing with Austin Matthews to really get things going, but that he was a first round pick. You look at those London Knights teams, he was right in the center of it. He's a good player. I think, does he need to work on things defensively? Absolutely. But the Leafs haven't failed to make in the playoffs, past the playoffs because they can't play defense. It's because they can't score. That's what Max Domi is brought in here to do. Let him do it, right? And so for me with Domi, the off-ice stuff, it's almost like a cherry on top of the pie. I just think there's more offensively he can give, and that's why I think a top 6 role is where he should start. I think a 3C, the only way it would work as a 3C is if it's a more offensively driven 3C role, which doesn't make sense to me. Put him on the wing, put him in a position where he can work with your better offensive players, right? Whether it's Matthews or whether it's Tavares, like one of those two lines. It could be all, at the same time, I'm thinking like the Sheldon Keefe Leafs.
Yep.
Craig Berube's Leafs could be totally different.
Oh, I think it's going to be totally different. I'm very excited to talk about that. We'll talk about Berube and what he'll mean to this squad very shortly. But the new D for the Toronto Maple Leafs, we have Tanev, we have Oliver Ekman-Larsson. Cade Weber is a project that I'm kind of excited to see where he goes. Bigger body guy, already talking about being a shutdown D. That excites him as that type of player, which is something the Leafs have been looking for, by the way. He was very excited once they traded the rights from Carolina over to the Leafs to be a part of the organization. So that's a good thing. This guy's excited to be here. So that's another player I think the Leafs can start to work in, see what he does here in training camp. Obviously, probably starting the Marlies. Yeah. But again, a blue chip kind of prospect on the back end never hurts in my eyes. But then I look at the guys they got. So Chris Tanev, we all know he's going to miss chunks of games. For the Leafs, just the style of play he plays. So down the stretch, load management for me and him, that's got to be key. You got to make sure if he's banged up or bruised up, he's got to take some games off and be ready for the playoffs because that's the style he plays. Do whatever you can as well for Oliver Ekman-Larsson. This guy looked like a beast for the Florida Panthers, rejuvenated himself, got himself a juicy deal with the Toronto Maple Leafs, and now we have another guy who can help move the puck. Transition game was something the Leafs were lacking in out of their own zone last year. They wanted Liljegren to take a jump. He didn't take the jump. Morgan Riley was that guy. They brought in a couple other guys to try to move that puck. But now with a guy like OEL, I think we can finally say the Leafs have a couple guys who can shuffle that puck out quite nicely.
I do. That was the unexpected one, was OEL. I know that Matt Roy was someone that they had also looked into, but they kind of ran out of money like it usually happens with the Leafs. But I look at OEL specifically first, and like I'm trying to figure out exactly where I think he works in the lineup. Like, do you just put him on the third pairing? He's in a more of a sheltered role because now obviously Tanev, you could throw him in there as like that purely defensive matchup. You got the Benoit McKay pairing that worked pretty good. Like, I'm very curious to see how they use OEL because I think Ekman-Larsson, again, he's a guy that has bounced around a few teams. I thought he was really good in Arizona, but that's Arizona. They didn't really have the support for him there. Vancouver didn't work because I just feel like Vancouver was such a mess with what they were doing, and he didn't get a chance to really flourish the way he should have. So Florida worked because he wasn't everything. Not too much was thrown at him. He could just be himself. And I think that's what the Leafs want him to do. And that's why I think he will probably, I would love to see an OEL Liljegren pairing maybe to start. Potentially, right?
Probably what it's going to be, though, because you don't want to break up Kaber and Benoit. That seems to be your shutdown pair.
Yeah, I doubt they would want to do that because we know Tanev is going to be Morgan Rielly's partner.
Yeah, it's the biggest non-secret in the world.
Right? Like that has to be how things are going with that. And so I do like to see how they'll potentially mix and match those things. But I really like having an Oliver Ekman-Larsson on the third pairing. Let's say that's where it goes. When the last time the Leafs had a guy like that as their third pairing defenseman? Like we talked about like what this team has really needed. They haven't had the depth. And when we talk about depth, we don't just mean an NHL body, capable NHL body, right? I also want to see, does he get power play time? Because like unfortunately Morgan Rielly, he's okay. Like we know he can do it, but I think OEL might even be better at doing it.
I don't disagree with you, not even one little bit.
So, like, I'd like to see if that's what they do with him, and kind of those are the rules, right? Have him on the power play, have him play third pairing. He can be a bit of a mentor with Liljegren. I mean, they're country mates. I just think that I think OEL has a lot still to give. It showed in Florida last year. Like, this is still a player that could do it. Maybe not to the level he was when he first came into the NHL, but he doesn't have to be that guy. And I think that's what's going to help him really flourish here. And then Tanev, how can you not be excited about? Like, people talk about Chris Tanev, the injuries, and the age. That guy went through the gauntlet last year in the playoffs.
Yep.
Right? He had to go against Eichel in the Golden Knights. He did that. He went up against McKinnon and the Avalanche. He did that.
Yep.
And then it's almost like that battle royale, and then like we're WB guys, and then you get like that third guy comes out as Connor McDavid, and you're just like you're exasperated by the end of it. Like,
yeah.
But again, still push that Edmonton team. Like, that's why I'm excited for Chris Tanev, because they realized they needed a guy like that, and I mean, I know that they had to pay to get it. I know it was probably more than maybe some people thought he was going to get, but you don't care. You go out and you get a guy that could be a legit top pairing right shot defenseman. Now, is he going to be a difference maker? No, but that will allow Morgan Rielly to do more of what Morgan Rielly needs to do. And that's why I'm excited, because Morgan Rielly hasn't had that partner. Since being with the Leafs, you look at the partners he has had.
I know, Lyubushkin, Hainsey,
Hunwick. Like Luke Schenn was the. Can we just say Luke Schenn was probably the best D partner Morgan Rielly has had in his tenure in Toronto?
Because like what I told you when we got Luke Schenn, he was a player who understood he's the red line back. He's not going up. He's staying back, and that is stay at home, let Rielly do what he needs to do. And I think you're going to see that with Chris Tanev and Spades better than Luke Schenn. And I think it's just going to be a great fit for the Maple Leafs. That's one thing. He understands his role. He doesn't need to jump up. Lyubushkin jumped up. Hunwick would jump up. Even Hainsey would try to jump up. Schenn understood his role. Red line and back. That's my role.
That's it for me too, right? And when I look at like Tanev specifically, right? And I wanted the Leafs to get him when he was leaving Vancouver before he went to Calgary.
Yep.
That's when I wanted the Leafs to get him, because I think it was that offseason that Rielly and him played together in the World Championships, and they were top pairing together. Now, obviously, Tanev's a bit older, but I think Morgan Rielly had an underwhelming season this year because he didn't have that guy. He didn't have that Luke Schenn. He was, again, I just saw how much better Rielly was in the playoffs last year, and I felt like that's just because he had trust in the guy that he was playing with.
Well, that'll be built again this season, and I can't wait to see it with Tanev.
Yeah, I can't wait either.
The one thing I can't wait to see is the Craig Berube-led Maple Leafs. Leafs bring in a new head coach. Obviously, I haven't done much stuff since the Leafs have made all these moves, but Craig Berube is now behind the bench. If you've been under a rock all season, welcome to the Craig Berube Show. He is a guy who plays for the crest on the front, not the name on the back. If you do not play his style of hockey or the way he wants you to play, he will make sure your arse is stapled to the bench. He will also make sure to get it out there amongst your teammates that, hey, we all got to spur this guy and get him going. If that doesn't work, he will use the relief valve called the media to call you out and show you what you need to do to be a better player. That is his last resort. He said it before, but Robert Thomas, Jordan Kyrou, those young players, they learned the hard way of how to deal with Craig Berube.
Well, not only that, you look at teams that have gone far in the playoffs. Okay, Sans Edmonton, I don't think Chris Knobloch is really that guy. But I look at Vegas, right? What Bruce Cassidy did there. I look at what even Boston, right? What they've done. I look at even Florida with Paul Maurice. You need a coach that's going to push your players to be at their best and also to set a standard and realize who's really in charge, right? I still felt like with Keefe, the Leafs were, I wouldn't say like the players got away with things. I just think that the players felt like they had the power. I still think maybe the players do have a bit of the power, but I also think Craig Berube, they brought him in because they needed a coach like this. They haven't had a coach like this. And like,
they did. Mike Babcock was that coach. He was hard on the players, but I think with Babcock, it wasn't the right time to have that hard.
No, Babcock was not the right coach for what they were trying to do. They were trying. That's a team that needed to grow into a Mike Babcock team, not start with that. But also, I mean, Craig Berube is tough, but we feel like tough but fair. Mike Babcock, as we have grown to find out, he was tough, but also just a jerk and not fair.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think that what I appreciate what Craig Berube did was he comes in, he has conversations with guys, especially like a guy like Mitch Marner. I guarantee those talks, I mean, it's funny, though that talk happens 5 minutes from where I live. Like, I know exactly where that was. I would have loved to be in a flight room to see exactly how Craig Berube, what he was talking, like, maybe he's just maybe he wants to figure out what makes Marner tick. What exactly is keeping what's keeping Mitch Marner from taking that game to the next level when it really matters, right? And I think what you're going to see from Craig Berube is if the Leafs have a subpar performance, you're not going to get just wasn't our night, or no.
We'll learn from this.
Yeah, we'll learn from this. No, he's going to probably say exactly what needs to be said, right? And I think the tone of the players, too, hopefully will be different. None of this, it's early, we still got time, we'll figure it out. No, it has to change. That tone has to change.
It has to be from day one, and we'll see that when camp opens, when it's the young guys, whether it's the older guys, whether it's the goaltending, it doesn't matter. He will not hold his tongue, which is going to be fun for this season to have a John Tortorella-esque kind of coach that's going to be shooting from the hip on things that he wants to say and talk about. So we'll see how that goes. Something else, we're going to see how it goes. And for me, I can side with the player here and side with the team, and that's Nick Robertson. Nick Robertson last season, 14 goals in 54 games played, I do believe it was, in a very limited role with the Maple Leafs. Then they said, hey, Nylander's hurt. We need you to play in the playoffs. But by the way, you haven't really played with everybody much, so figure it out. And, oh, by the way, it's the most pressure cooker time of the season. Please go score us goals without really any chemistry on your belt. So I can side with the player a little bit, but I can side with the team and also say, hey, you've been given many opportunities, let's use a WWE term, to grab the brass ring, and you really haven't grabbed that ring at all. So for me, I'm like, okay, Nick Robertson this year, take a 1-year deal. This is your clearest path to having a top 6 role that you'll probably ever get with the Maple Leafs, unless they bring in Match Pacioretty, which seems to be a thing all of a sudden. But Nick Robertson, this is your chance. Take that 1-year deal. Show us what you are. Stay healthy. Put up 25 goals like we all hoped you would score. And then everybody's happy. What do you think?
What team, I'm trying to think right now, is going to give Nick Robertson the opportunity I think he is looking for?
San Jose? That's it.
Chicago? Like, do you want to go to a team like that? The Leafs will gladly trade him. I mean, if they would have gladly traded him, they would have done. But I think Brad Treliving is trying really hard to, I think, get Nick Robertson to understand. Like, I know that it's gone well for him. There needs to be a talk about, you know what, but we want to turn a new page. Like, let's forget what happened before. Let's start fresh. You get a fresh opportunity in training camp, new coach, clear-cut opportunities. Like, there's no set defined. I talked about maybe Max Domi on the top 6, maybe Matthew Knights. Those are maybes. That's not defined right now. It could be, probably likely could be, but it's not yet, right? There's opportunities here, and I get it. Again, he got screwed by the salary cap last year. He was an easy cut guy to send out. That was very unfortunate.
Yeah.
And they made that apparent. But when he came back, as you said, where was that Nick Robertson, right? The dynamic player, right? Yep. He's also a player that I think because of his small stature, he feels he has to go out of his way to show that he's not a small player, which is a wrong way to go about it. You have to do what makes you you.
Don't do what got you to the dance. There's a reason you got here in the first place.
Exactly. Be that guy that gets into scoring opportunities, and when the puck is on your stick, it's going in the net. That's who you are, right? And again, I think that got lost because he's trying to find a way. How do I get myself here every day? And that's hard for a player. I don't know if maybe he just didn't have the right guidance with it, or he felt kind of got lost in the weeds a little bit. But if it's because of what happened with the Sheldon Keefe time, I don't know how it hasn't gone the message to him saying this is an opportunity for you to do things differently. But the way it's sounding, especially with Chris Johnson coming out saying he just doesn't want to sign a contract here, if it's gotten to that point, at this rate, I think right now the Leafs are just at a point where it's like, we're not getting much for you. Like, I don't know if he the value is just not there.
Yeah,
yes,
I think
he's put up production.
Let him sit.
Yeah, and personally, I think that's the right way to go about it because I don't think Robertson realizes that the way he's going about this, he's not a Rucker McGroarty. He can't just ask out and get moved to where he wants to go. He's not a Patrick Laine where a team's willing to go and take a chance on him.
He's not an Askarov.
He's not, and that's the problem right now. I think he feels like he is, but he's not. Hey, you know what? Give Dallas a call. See if maybe he wants to go play with his brother. I don't know. Like it's gotten to the point where the Leafs need to figure that like they don't want this to be a training camp story, right?
I don't think they will let it be one either. I think that they'll say one thing and that's it. If he's not showing up, guys, he's not showing up and that's it.
Yeah, and it'd be very unfortunate for him if he doesn't show up because it's gonna again. He wants to go to a new team, and the new team's like, well, if you don't like what's going on here, you're gonna do the same things you did in Toronto.
That's it. That's the way they'll look at it, though. They will pin that on him. And they'll make it look like that's the type of guy he is, and you'll be painted with that brush, which is not a good thing. That's why I say take the 1-year deal, show up, show off, do the Jake DeBrusk thing.
Exactly.
On your deal, and then walk yourself to UFA and go sign where you want to sign for a big juicy deal because you showed up and played the right way. That's what happened with DeBrusk. He wanted out of Boston how many times? And then finally played, and now he's got a juicy kind of deal over in Vancouver. So Nick Robertson, there's a path for you. Look at what was presented to DeBrusk. Go the same way. Figure it out. Maybe go deep with the Leafs. Have a good playoffs too. And that really adds fuel to your fire to have more desire to go other ways. But guy for me this season I think is going to have a lot of fuel is Joe Woll. This guy is looked at to be the starter for the Toronto Maple Leafs. I've liked this guy for a long time. I know you've liked this guy for a long time. He showed us what he can be last year. A couple of freak kind of injuries. One, not anchoring his foot right, getting the high ankle sprain. And then, of course, the back injury. Hopefully that's just a one-off kind of thing. Yeah. From what I understand, it's a freak kind of injury. It's not a reoccurring kind of injury that'll happen. So hopefully that's a thing of the past. But this guy is showing us what he can be. And then you look at a guy who just got traded to Ottawa in Allmark talking about how Joe Woll is that guy, that he thinks he's that uber talented that if he was in the net for the Maple Leafs to start that series against Boston, it would have went differently. So that kind of makes me excited when you hear other goaltenders, your peers around the league saying, yeah, this is the dog. This guy can really be a number one goaltender. And then you bring in Stolarz to back him up, a man who just went on a cup run, who probably learned a few things from Bob as well. I'm loving it, man. I think this tandem could be really the biggest story for the Maple Leafs in a positive way, because so many people are undervaluing what they can be and saying that this is going to be the Achilles heel for the Leafs. I think for once, this is going to be a story that turns the whole league like, oh, this is a cheap tandem and they're doing wicked. Because the Leafs need that to fall for them at least once.
They do. And again, it also speaks to the goaltending position and how it is today. Joe Woll fits that a lot more, right? The calmness in net.
Yeah.
Ilya Samsonov did some good things in Toronto, but the last thing you can say about Ilya Samsonov is he was a calm goaltender of the net.
And he wasn't.
And the Leafs need that. I think that's why I've always liked Joe Woll from when he first got brought up. I'm like, this kid probably deserves more game time. Should be used more. And then he comes in. He comes into the playoffs against Florida. The Leafs have been playing let's just come out and say they played terribly, but he was the one shining bright light in that series, right? Then they go into the year. Again, they weren't ready to give him the net, but I think a guy who didn't play a lot, obviously because of injuries, but slowly he was getting it. You saw how he can elevate this team because he's the way that he can make that save that maybe other goaltenders can't make, right? But it's also just the mindset he has. He doesn't have social media. He doesn't let the outside noise in, which goalies are weird, right? But that's what you need. You need a goalie that's a little different, right? And I've been a big Joe Woll fan. I also said he should have been starting in the playoffs. Like he should. I can understand why Samsonov made. I was leaning more towards Woll, and eventually that did happen. Again, I don't know if goaltending. It may have made a difference earlier in the series. Later in the series, I think the Leafs just also. I mean, let's not open up old wounds, but I also just think that when you look at the way Joe Woll has carried himself, and now he's got something to prove with this new contract. People are like, oh, they paid him this much already. That's kind of a betting on what you have. And you're, again, internal development.
Yeah.
I've always been a big fan of finding a way to get your own guys, right? You put in the time, you know how they are, you know what makes them tick. And I like the Stolarz move because I think, yes, he is a backup, but I think there's a little more to him as a backup, right? I know some people are like, he hasn't played a lot. He has. It's just we haven't seen it. In Anaheim,
Yep.
Pretty good on a pretty bad Anaheim team, right? In Florida, he was pretty good. Yes, Florida's played very well, but he's a part of that, right? I feel like people are just like, but he played for a good team. Well, they were a good team because he was a good player, right?
He didn't hinder them, that's for sure.
Right? So they didn't lose in spite of him. And I think that goes the same with Joe Woll, right? Did he struggle when he came back from injury? It tends to happen, especially considering how long he was out for. There's going to be a little bit of that unsure feeling when you come back from an injury. Not, you're trying to figure out what can I do to avoid getting injured again, right?
Yeah.
So I know the injuries will be the talking point for Joe Woll. He's going to have to find a way to black that out, not let that kind of come into his psyche. I also just think the Leafs, hopefully the plan this offseason was figuring out what exactly is leading to these unfortunate injuries with Joe Woll, right? You get a healthy Joe Woll, you get a good goalie like him, it changes everything, right?
Well, it calms the team down, right? We've said this many times. Yes. When Jack Campbell was on, when Samsonov was on,
when
and
Anderson
the team believed it. Yeah, when that team believed in the goaltender behind them, they played differently. They can make a little bit of a risky play knowing their goalie can bail them out. Mm-hmm. They can do different things and not worry, oh, crap, I gave the puck up, and now it's a for sure goal because the goalie is in position. The goalie can do his job. They feel secure. They felt that way with Joe Woll. I can say they felt that way with Samsonov once he regained his game. but it was shaky there for a while. But yeah, no, it's that confidence in what's behind you.
Like, let's not have to have the team score 5+ goals a night to win a game.
Yeah.
Craig Brewery's not going to want that. He's going to he's going to want his guys to play and score and all those things, but he's not going to want his team to have to win 6-5, 5-4. He doesn't want that.
No.
And again, that happened. How many of those games to start the year last year because Samsonov wasn't right. So I think that's a big thing for the Leafs is they got to find a way to calm their game down, and I think Joe Woll helps with that a lot more. I'm also hoping he's gonna have a little bit of that prove the doubters wrong mentality, because that's always great for a player to have that kind of mentality going into it, and I hope that's gonna work for him. And with Stolarz, I'm hoping that this isn't I'm gonna push to play a lot of games. I hope it's gonna be a true tandem where, you know what, if Woll needs a few games, Stolarz can do it. I don't want this to also be one of those, who's going to be the starter? I think it's clear-cut Joe Woll's a starter, and Stolarz, you know what, maybe playing more than your average backup, which I'm okay with because I think, again...
Well, I think Joe Woll this year, you have to kind of work him into the starter's mentality.
Yeah.
And I think Stolarz understands what being a backup is. He's already been in that position. He understands what his game is and where he's at, and he'll fill in when needed as well.
Exactly. I think that's the best way to go about it. And again, you got a coach that's not going to leave anything open for interpretation either.
No, which is great. All right, well, let's wrap it with this one here for this part. Leafs finish where to you? For me, I'm saying this team has an opportunity to be atop the Atlantic Division this season. I do think Tampa's going to tumble. I do think the Stanley Cup hangover for the Florida Panthers. Still going to be a playoff team, but I do think there will be a little bit of a stumbling block, maybe. Champagne, caviar kind of day. And then I do think the Boston Bruins will be in the mix, but I don't think they're going to be the big bad Bruins as they always are.
Yeah, I mean, the Atlantic, I thought last year was the Leafs' opportunity to go for the Atlantic title, and that didn't work out. I think it all depends on the start. If they get off to such a good start, they're like, again, Florida's going to be one of those teams where I'm wondering, do they have a bit of that hangover? Tampa, with Vasilevsky being healthy, I still have them in the mix for the playoffs, especially top 3, just because of the guys that they have there. Yeah, they use Stamkos, but I still think with Vasilevsky being healthy, that makes it tough to totally bet against Tampa, but I've also seen a Tampa team that's regressed. So I think there's a little bit of that. But yeah, I think top for the division, you're always going to say that with the Leafs because of who they have, right? You still got, I always said, like, with Mitch Marner in his contract year, there should be no more of a motivated player.
Yes.
I want Mitch Marner to go into the season. Yeah, if he goes and has a career year, it usually means a good thing for your team if Mitch Marner's having a career year. Does it also mean that there's going to be all this contract talk? It's going to happen. But you've got a couple of guys who have a little bit to prove here, and I hope that's what motivates them, right? To really go for it. I think goaltending is going to be what determines really the ceiling of this team. Because if the goaltending does fall flat, that's going to be tough. But I mean, Ottawa improved. They've improved. I wouldn't say that they're in the conversation of the top 3. Like, let's talk about them getting towards the playoffs first. But
I think they're a wild card team this year.
Yeah, I think Ottawa being better. I mean, Ottawa always plays the Leafs tough, so it's no different than before. But I just look at this Atlantic. It is getting harder, but at the same time, out of all the teams, especially the ones from last year that were in the mix, I think the Leafs improved the most. Right? Maybe you could say Boston because they did get some upgrades, but that's a team that, in my opinion, on paper, should not have even been anywhere close to what they were last year. I think they had a lot of guys overachieve. They're not going to have that Swayman-Allmark tandem. They're going to have to hope Korpisalo could pick up the slack, which...
By the way, Swayman isn't signed yet.
Yeah, I think it will happen. It's going to take time to get that right number. But, I mean, Swayman's good. How much will it change with him and Corpusal? I don't know. Zadorov was a decent ad, maybe a little overpriced. I think they just overpaid for guys, but they got players that are going to help them. But I think like if I'm looking, it's going to be Toronto, Florida, and Boston. Those are the top three for me again. But I think the Leafs have the opportunity to go above them if everything that they've done works in the right favor, which it doesn't always happen. But they've done enough, in my opinion, to really, I think, hopefully do things differently and have that different mentality going into this year.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. We're still a couple of weeks away from training camp, but it's September. It's time to get the podcast back fired up. So I'm happy to have you on, talk some Leafs, get fired up for what's about to come down the pipeline. But David, thank you very much for jumping on. Everyone, go check out Locked On Leafs. I think with September rolling around, you're back to 5 times a week.
We'll be mid-September. We'll be back to 5 a week. So I think September 16th, around that time, we're going to be back to 5 a week. All
right. So right now, still 3 times a week. You can hear David and, of course, Mikey Canuck, a.k.a. Al's brother, over on Locked On Leafs. Make sure you check them out. But, ladies and gentlemen, this right here, this is Offside Hockey Talk, where the Maple Leafs and hockey come to talk.